I never thought I'd be dealing with an HOA nightmare, especially since I didn't even live in an HOA. But somehow, one entitled woman made it her mission to drag me into her reign of suburban terror. It all started on a quiet Saturday morning. The kind where the sun spills golden light over the backyard, birds chirp lazily in the trees, and all you want is to enjoy a cup of coffee in peace. That's exactly what I was doing, sitting on my porch watching my two dogs chase each other near the fence line. Then I saw her. Before we dive in, have you ever had an HOA nightmare? Tell me in the comments. Give this video a like and subscribe to give a support to this channel. A woman in her mid-50s, platinum blonde hair teased to impossible heights, marching toward my property like she owned it. She had that stiff, upright posture, the kind that screams, "I have authority and I intend to use it." She stopped just shy of my driveway, peering at my fence with her hands on her hips. At first I thought she was lost. Maybe a neighbor needing directions or someone mistaking my house for another. But then she pulled out her phone, snapped a picture of my fence and started typing furiously. Something about it set me on edge. I had built that fence myself. A sturdy, well-maintained electric fence to keep my dogs safe inside. It wasn't a danger to anyone unless they were foolish enough to grab it. I got up from my chair and took a few steps toward the woman. Before I could even ask if she needed something, she spun on her heel and stalked off down the street. Weird. I brushed it off, thinking she was just another nosy neighbor who had nothing better to do. I should have known better. The trouble started that evening. I was inside finishing up dinner when I heard voices outside. Low, urgent. The kind that make you pause and listen. I walked to the window and peeked through the blinds. 2 police officers were standing at my fence. A sick feeling settled in my stomach as I stepped outside, forcing a polite smile. "Officers, can I help you?" One of them, a tall man with a clipboard, glanced at me. "Sir, we received a report about an illegal electric fence on this property. Mind explaining?" My heart thumped. Illegal? I'm not in an HOA, and the fence is within regulation. The other officer, shorter and stockier, exchanged a look with his partner. "We were told this fence poses a danger to the community." I scoffed. "By who?" Before they could answer, a voice cut through the air. A voice dripping with smug satisfaction. I did. I turned and there she was, the same woman from earlier, standing at the end of my driveway, arms crossed over her chest. "I'm the head of the HOA," she announced. "And this fence is a liability." I blinked. "The HOA?" I let out a short laugh. "I'm not even in your neighborhood." Her eyes narrowed. "Doesn't matter. Your property backs up to our community, and we have certain expectations." A slow, burning frustration crawled up my spine. "I don't answer to your HOA." The police officers shifted uncomfortably, as if they realized how absurd this was getting. But Karen wasn't done. She lifted her chin, staring at me like I was some unruly child. "I'm afraid you do. And if you don't take this fence down, I will escalate this matter." I clenched my jaw, willing myself to stay calm. "Escalate it how?" Her lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, you'll see." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with 2 confused cops and a sinking feeling in my gut. I had no idea what kind of storm she was about to unleash, but I was about to find out. I watched as Karen strutted away, her heels clicking against the pavement like a villain walking off-screen after delivering a chilling threat. The cops exchanged a glance. The taller one sighed. "Sir, we don't enforce HOA rules, but if she pushes this through city code enforcement, they might give you trouble." The shorter officer frowned. "Your fence is within legal limits. Just be ready in case she tries anything." I nodded, my mind already racing. I had dealt with difficult people before, but this woman had a different kind of energy, the kind that doesn't stop until they get what they want. That night I barely slept. A nagging feeling told me this wasn't over. And I was right. Because by morning my fence was gone. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, only to freeze mid-sip. My entire electric fence, the one I'd spent weeks installing, the one I had just told the cops was completely legal, was nowhere to be seen. I set my mug down on the porch railing, my heart hammering. My dogs were still in the yard, confused but safe. But the metal posts, the wiring, everything was gone. I scanned the property line, looking for any sign of damage, when my gaze landed on something shoved into the dirt where my fence used to stand. A single sheet of paper. I walked over, stomach churning, and picked it up. A formal violation notice. This fence has been removed due to non-compliance with HOA safety regulations. Further resistance will result in escalating penalties. HOA board. I gritted my teeth. Escalating penalties? I wasn't even part of their stupid HOA. I stormed back inside and grabbed my phone, dialing the number on the letter. It rang 3 times before someone picked up. "This is the Oak Ridge Heights HOA office," a clipped voice answered. I kept my voice level. "Yeah, I just got a notice saying my fence was removed. Who authorized this?" There was a pause. Then the voice spoke again, smoother this time. "That would be our president, Ms. Whitmore." I gripped the phone tighter. "You mean Karen?" A slight cough. "Ms. Whitmore." I took a breath, fighting to keep my temper in check. "Listen carefully. I don't live in your HOA. You had no right to touch my property." Another pause. Then the voice on the other end let out a small, knowing chuckle. "Are you sure about that?" Something about the way they said it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I clenched my jaw. "Positive." A longer silence this time. Then the voice simply said, "I'd double-check that if I were you," before the line went dead. A sinking feeling settled in my gut. I walked to my office, pulled open my filing cabinet, and grabbed the deed to my property. I skimmed the paperwork, looking for anything mentioning HOA jurisdiction. Nothing. I wasn't in their community. My house was built outside their boundary. They had zero legal power over me. So what did they mean by double-check that? I turned back to my desk, about to call my lawyer, when I noticed something on my phone. A new email. From the Oak Ridge Heights HOA board. My stomach tightened as I opened it. Subject: Urgent notice of HOA membership. Dear homeowner, due to recent jurisdictional expansions, your property now falls under the Oak Ridge Heights HOA. This change was finalized as of last week. You are now subject to all HOA rules and guidelines, effective immediately. Welcome to the community. Regards, HOA Compliance Office. I read the email 3 times, my pulse pounding louder each time. They had expanded their neighborhood's boundary. And they had absorbed my property into it. Not by mistake. Not by chance. They did it on purpose. Karen had just legally pulled me into her HOA. And she had no idea what she just started. I stared at the email, my hands gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. This had to be a joke. A stunt. A desperate, pathetic attempt by Karen to scare me. I yanked my laptop open and pulled up the county zoning records. My property had been outside the Oak Ridge Heights HOA for years. No way they could just change that overnight. But as I typed in my address and hit search, my stomach dropped. A new zoning map loaded on my screen. The Oak Ridge Heights boundary had been expanded. Right over my land. This wasn't a bluff. It was official. A fresh wave of anger surged through me. They had gone through legal channels, probably bribed some local officials, to absorb my property into their dystopian nightmare. And they'd done it without telling me. I slammed my laptop shut. No way was I rolling over for this. They stole my fence. They stole my rights. Now they were about to find out they messed with the wrong guy. But first I needed answers. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to City Hall. The receptionist barely looked up when I stepped inside. "Can I help you?" I slid the printed HOA notice across the counter. "Yeah, I need to speak with someone about this." She glanced at the letter. "Zoning changes are handled by the Municipal Planning Office. 3rd floor." I nodded, already heading for the elevator. When I stepped out onto the 3rd floor, I saw a familiar face, one I hadn't expected. Councilman Eric Winslow. He was shaking hands with someone in a suit, laughing like he had no worries in the world. My stomach twisted. Winslow had been on the city council for years. The kind of guy who made backroom deals and smiled in your face while stabbing you in the back. And the moment his gaze landed on me, that smile vanished. He turned to leave, but I was faster. "Councilman Winslow," I called, stepping into his path. "Got a minute?" His jaw tightened. "I'm in a hurry." I held up my phone, displaying the HOA email. "I'll be quick. When exactly did you approve this boundary expansion?" He hesitated. "That's public record." "Right. And I'm the public. So tell me." His lips pressed into a thin line. "The request was submitted 2 months ago. Approved last week." I narrowed my eyes. "Without notifying homeowners?" He sighed, rubbing his temples like I was just another headache in his day. "Legally, they only had to notify members of the existing HOA." My pulse pounded in my ears. "That's ridiculous. My property wasn't part of their HOA 2 months ago." He shrugged. "They argued it was a natural expansion of their community." I took a step closer. "Did they pay you for that argument?" His jaw clenched. "I suggest you take this up with your new HOA board." He turned to leave, but I wasn't done. "One last question. Who submitted the request?" Winslow exhaled sharply, like he was already regretting talking to me. Then he muttered a name under his breath. Karen Whitmore. Of course. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't just some overstepping HOA now, this was a calculated takeover. And Karen had just made a massive mistake. She thought forcing me into her HOA meant she had control. She had no idea that I was about to flip the entire script. Because if they wanted me in their HOA, I was about to become the worst nightmare their board had ever seen. I drove home in silence, my mind working faster than my foot on the gas pedal. Karen hadn't just been harassing me. She'd been plotting this from the start, probably even before she ever confronted me about the electric fence. And now she thought she'd won. But she had no clue who she was messing with. The second I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something was off. My security cameras. The little red light on each one was dead. I pulled out my phone to check the app, offline. That wasn't just a power surge. Someone had cut them. A slow, cold rage settled in my chest. I stepped out of the truck, scanning the yard. Everything looked normal, until I noticed faint tire tracks in the dirt by my back fence. Someone had been on my property, and they wanted me blind. I took a deep breath. No sudden moves. Whoever did this might still be watching. I walked inside like I hadn't noticed a thing. But the moment I locked the door behind me, I grabbed my spare phone, the one not connected to my home Wi-Fi. I called my buddy Jake. Former military, now a private security consultant. Talk to me, he answered on the first ring. I need a favor. Someone's messing with me. I gave him a quick rundown, the HOA takeover, the cameras, the intrusion. Jake was quiet for a second. Then he said, they're trying to intimidate you. But they're getting sloppy. If they were pros, you wouldn't have noticed the tire tracks. So what do I do? Fight back. I smirked. Already planning on it? No, Jake said. I mean really fight back. You need proof. Cameras they don't know about. Motion sensors. And if they come back. I could hear the grin in his voice. Let's make them regret it. That night, I set up hidden trail cameras around the property. Battery-powered, completely off-grid. I installed motion detectors at every fence line. If someone so much as breathed in my yard, I'd know about it. Then I waited. Sure enough, it didn't take long. 2:47 a.m. My phone buzzed, motion detected. I pulled up the trail cam footage. A shadowy figure crept through my yard. They moved cautiously, scanning the area, as if checking to see if my security system was still down. Then they made their way toward my garage. I zoomed in. Karen. And she wasn't alone. A man was with her, someone I didn't recognize. Stocky build, hood pulled over his face. I watched as he pulled something from his pocket. A can of spray paint. They were tagging my property. My blood boiled. They were marking it as theirs. But they didn't know I was watching. I grabbed my shotgun, flipped the porch lights on, and threw the door open. The look on Karen's face was priceless. Her accomplice bolted, dropping the spray paint as he took off toward the street. Karen stood frozen like a deer in headlights. Go ahead, I called out. Finish your masterpiece. She stammered, taking a shaky step backward. This isn't what it looks like. I chuckled. Really? Because it looks like trespassing and vandalism to me. I pulled out my phone and flashed the live footage from my trail cam. Karen's face went pale. She knew she was caught. But before I could call the cops, she did something that threw me completely off guard. She dropped to her knees. And she started begging. Please, she whispered, her voice trembling. You don't understand. I had no choice. I stared at her, my grip tightening on my shotgun. No choice? For the first time since this nightmare started. I wondered if Karen wasn't actually the one pulling the strings. Karen knelt there trembling. Her usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something else. Fear. I didn't lower the shotgun. Not yet. Start talking, I said, keeping my voice steady. Karen's hands shook as she clutched at the hem of her cardigan. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I swear. I glanced at the spray can still rolling near her feet. Vandalizing my property says otherwise. She swallowed hard. You don't get it. I wasn't marking your house. I was sending a message. That made me pause. To who? Karen's eyes darted toward the street, where her accomplice had disappeared. I can't say. I took a slow step forward. Try. She hesitated, then whispered, if I tell you, they'll come after me too. A cold weight settled in my gut. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA president throwing her weight around. This was bigger. Before I could press further, headlights flooded the street. A black SUV rolled up, moving slow. Too slow. Karen jerked upright. Oh God. No. I barely had time to register what was happening before she took off. She bolted past me, ran toward my backyard, and vanished into the woods behind my property. The SUV came to a stop. The tinted window rolled down just enough for me to see a pair of cold, calculating eyes. Then just as silently the vehicle backed up and disappeared down the road. I stood there gripping my shotgun, pulse hammering. What the hell had I just stepped into? The next morning I replayed the footage from my trail cams. Something about the man with Karen nagged at me. I zoomed in, adjusting the contrast. There. A patch on his jacket. It wasn't from any HOA. It wasn't even local. I ran a quick search, and what I found made my stomach drop. The emblem belonged to a private security firm. One with a history of handling unofficial business. These guys weren't enforcing HOA rules. They were enforcing silence. I spent the next few days digging, talking to neighbors, following every lead Karen had unknowingly left behind. And that's when I found it. A contract. Buried in the HOA's digital records, signed months ago by a company I'd never heard of. The wording was vague, full of legal jargon, until I reached the fine print. HOA had been selling off properties. Not foreclosures. Not abandoned homes. Active residences. They were forcing people out. And then I saw the kicker. Karen's name was all over it. She wasn't just enforcing HOA rules. She was helping them take over the neighborhood. And when I checked the addresses of the homes that had already been sold, I felt my blood turn to ice. One of them had belonged to my old neighbor. The one who had moved away without saying goodbye. I pulled out my phone and called Jake. "We have a problem," I said. "Yeah." His voice was calm, but I knew he was already alert. I exhaled. "This isn't about the HOA anymore." Silence. Then, "Meet me in 20 minutes. And bring every piece of evidence you've got." I grabbed the files and headed out, but something stopped me cold. My front door was open. I knew I had locked it. I stepped inside, every sense on high alert. The living room was untouched. Kitchen same. Then I saw it. A single piece of paper on my coffee table. No signature. No explanation. Just 3 words, printed neatly in bold black ink. "Stop digging. Now." I stared at the note. "Stop digging. Now." My pulse pounded in my ears. The message was clear. Someone had been inside my house. I scanned the living room. Nothing was out of place. No sign of forced entry. But the air felt wrong. Stale, like someone had been here, watching. I backed toward the front door, phone in hand, ready to call Jake. That's when I heard it. A soft click. My gaze snapped to the hallway. The attic hatch was slightly open. My stomach twisted into knots. Someone was still inside. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I tightened my grip on my shotgun and stepped forward. Slowly. Quietly. I reached for the pull string. My fingers trembled. Then I yanked it down. Nothing. The attic was dark and silent. A single beam of dust-filled light from the hallway illuminated the wooden boards. Empty. Except. I swallowed hard and took a step up. My boot nudged something. A cell phone. Not mine. I picked it up, the screen cracked but still on. A recording was playing. It was me. Audio of me talking to Jake. My conversation from earlier. Someone had been listening. A movement in the corner of my eye. The vent cover was loose. They hadn't left through the door. They had crawled through the air vents. I nearly dropped the phone. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. This was a full-scale operation. I met Jake 20 minutes later at an old diner just outside of town. He barely sat down before I slid the phone across the table. "Tell me I'm crazy." He tapped the screen, listening to the recording. His expression darkened. "You're not crazy." He exhaled sharply. "This is next level." I leaned in. "Who the hell are we dealing with?" Jake hesitated. Then he pulled out his own phone and scrolled through some files. "What do you know about land development?" I frowned. "Not much." "Well, you should." He turned the screen toward me. "Because your neighborhood is sitting on a gold mine." I scanned the documents. Underground mineral rights. Developers had been snatching up land, paying off local HOAs to force people out under the guise of violations and legal action. Once the homeowners were gone, the properties were flipped, rezoned, and sold to shell corporations. "That's why they're so aggressive," I muttered. "They're not just after control. They're after the land." Jake nodded. "And if you keep exposing them, you'll be the next one moving away." I clenched my jaw. "Then we need to hit back. Hard." Jake smirked. "Already ahead of you." He slid another folder across the table. Inside were bank transfers, contracts, and... I froze. Karen's signature. She had been selling out the community all along. But there was one more name that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just Karen. It was someone I knew. Someone I had trusted. And the second I saw it, I knew I had just made myself the biggest target of all. My eyes locked onto the name at the bottom of the document. I read it once, twice. My brain refused to process it. Jake. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight I could barely breathe. It didn't make sense. Jake had been my only ally in this mess. He was the one who encouraged me to fight back. The one who fed me information. But right there in black and white, his name. His signature. I forced my expression to stay neutral. If he saw me react, I was as good as dead. I closed the folder slowly, pushing it back toward him. So, what's the next step? Jake leaned in, lowering his voice. I say we go public. Leak everything. He was watching me carefully, measuring my reaction. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. Yeah, that makes sense. Inside, my pulse was thundering. I had two options: play along, pretend I hadn't seen his name and figure out my move later, or call him out right now and risk whatever consequences came with it. I chose the first option. For now. That night I didn't go home. I parked 3 blocks away from my house, shut off my headlights and watched from a distance. The street was quiet. Too quiet. Then I saw it. A black SUV idling near my driveway. The same one that had been tailing me the other day. 2 figures sat inside, barely visible through the tinted windows. They weren't moving. Just waiting. For what? For me? My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. I wasn't walking into a trap. I backed out, taking the long way around town until I reached the one place I knew I could think clearly, an old motel on the outskirts. I barely slept. The second the sun came up, I was back at the diner. Not to meet Jake. Not this time. I had called someone else. Someone who used to be HOA but got out before things turned dirty. Her name was Lisa. She arrived 10 minutes later, sliding into the booth across from me with a wary expression. You said it was urgent. I didn't waste time. How deep does this thing go? She sighed, rubbing her temples. Deeper than you think. I pushed the folder toward her. Jake's in on it. She skimmed the papers, her expression hardening. I figured. I tensed. You knew. Lisa hesitated. Then she leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake isn't just in on it. He's been leading you around like a dog on a leash. A chill ran down my spine. Explain. She exhaled. Every piece of information he's given you? It's been controlled. He's been feeding you just enough to keep you from looking in the wrong places. Every break you got in this case? He allowed it. I felt sick. Why? I forced out. Lisa's eyes were filled with something close to pity. Because they need you to take the fall. The realization hit me like a freight train. They had set me up. The documents. The phone. The break-ins. Everything. They weren't trying to scare me away. They were trying to build a case. Make it look like I was the one behind everything. And once the evidence was in place, they'd let the law bury me. Or worse, they wouldn't even let it get that far. I swallowed hard. Then I need to disappear. Lisa shook her head. No. You need to fight smarter. I frowned. What do you mean? She slid her phone across the table. On the screen was a recording. Jake's voice. He's getting too close. If we don't handle him soon, it won't matter how much evidence we plant. He'll find a way to blow this wide open. My blood turned to ice. Lisa's eyes were sharp. You want to win this? We turn their own game against them. Lisa's words rang in my ears. Turn their own game against them. For weeks, I thought I was peeling back the layers of their corruption, exposing the truth piece by piece. But I wasn't investigating them. They were controlling me. Jake had played me from the start, and now they were ready to toss me into the fire. But if they wanted to frame me? I was about to make sure the evidence didn't just point at me, it pointed at all of them. Lisa and I worked through the night, combing through everything I had gathered. Documents, recordings, emails. Some of it was legit. Some of it was planted. We needed something undeniable. Something that would blow up in their faces before they had the chance to bury me. And then at 3:27 a.m. Lisa found it. An audio file. Buried deep in one of the encrypted folders Jake had sent me weeks ago. It was disguised as a system log, something no one would think twice about. But when Lisa ran a decryption tool on it, the distortion cleared. A voice crackled to life. Yeah, just make sure the cops find it in his garage. If it's in his possession, it won't matter if he denies it. The DA will eat it up. Silence. Then another voice responded, this one unmistakable. Jake. And if he doesn't take the bait? The first voice chuckled darkly. Then we handle it the other way. The audio cut out. Lisa and I locked eyes. It wasn't just corruption. It wasn't just intimidation. They were planning to kill me. By sunrise I had a plan. The goal wasn't just to leak the information. It was to make sure everyone saw it before they had a chance to control the narrative. We prepared 3 separate USB drives, each containing everything we had. The recordings, the documents, the photos. Lisa sent the files to multiple news outlets, social media accounts, and even a few watchdog groups. By noon, the first articles were already live. By 3 p.m., the local news had picked it up. By 6 p.m., Jake's face was all over the internet. The comments exploded. How deep does this go? They really thought they could get away with this? Dude, I hope OP is safe. This is next-level criminal. And then, a breaking news update. HOA officials arrested. Bank accounts frozen. A federal investigation launched. It was over. Or so I thought. That night I was packing my things when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at the screen. Every instinct told me not to answer. I picked up anyway. Silence. Then a single breath. And one word. Run. The line went dead. My stomach dropped. This wasn't over. I grabbed my keys, my heart hammering. But when I stepped outside, Jake was standing at the edge of my driveway. His face was calm. Too calm. I told you, he murmured. You should have just let it go. He took a step forward. Behind him, headlights flickered on. 2 black SUVs. Engines growling. Blocking the only way out. The HOA wasn't just some corrupt board. It was something much, much bigger. And I had only scratched the surface.